If you have watched, read, or followed Bleach for any extended amount of time, one of the biggest questions in this community is the nature of Sosuke Aizen's true power. More specifically, the mystery surrounding Aizen's Bankai, the final evolution of a Soul Reaper's Zanpakuto. What does it do, and does he even have one to begin with? Despite this series for running nearly 25 years and Aizen being introduced into the story in 2003, we still don't know the nature of Aizen's full capabilities. Even such things as Aizen's backstory or how he came to know about the Soul King has not been revealed to us. And because Bleach is now entering its final core in a 1000-year Blood War anime, I figured now's the time to make a video on this topic. Aizen vs Yuha will finally be animated, and this will be our highest chance of seeing Aizen use his full potential, and hopefully we get to see his Bankai. Something that wasn't shown in the manga, as Kubo was getting rushed to complete it back in 2016. There's also the fact that Kubo was adding more content in the 4th core. He's already been doing this, adding scenes like the original Gote 13 in the 1st season, as well as extending the fights with Uryu and Renji. And obviously the conversation between Aizen and Yuha back in Muken. So needless to say, I got my hopes up pretty high that we're gonna see Aizen's Bankai in this adaptation, and I know I'm not the only one. But for now, we can only speculate this until Kubo finally reveals it to us, either through the anime or future projects or even just a random interview. So for this video, I'm going to be covering what a Zanpakuto is, how does one train to achieve Shikai and Bankai, as well as going over some narrative implications to help us answer the mystery surrounding Aizen's Bankai. So naturally, I think the first question that naturally comes to mind is whether Aizen actually does have a Bankai. The first reason people like to cite as Aizen having one was in episode 42 of the anime, where Yoruichi was training Ichigo and says that all captains in the Gote 13 had to master both Shikai and Bankai before getting their captain rank, with the sole exception of Kenpachi, of course. Now at first glance, this seems like a really strong argument for the existence of his Bankai, but we know Aizen is a massive liar and could have easily just used Kyoka Suigetsu to fool everyone into believing he had one. Like he tricked the Soul Society into believing he had a water-type Zanpakuto, as well as covering up all of his holification experiments on his work colleagues in the Turn Back the Pendulum flashback. So unfortunately, this isn't sufficient enough evidence to confirm if Aizen had obtained Bankai. There's also potentially statements in the Spirits Are Forever With You novels. Aizen's Bankai gets mentioned, but I think this was an error in translation, as this was most likely talking about his Shikai's weakness rather than his Bankai. I think the most concrete way to confirm if he has one is to just analyze Aizen's goal and character in the story of Bleach. After losing to Ichigo's final Getsuga Tenshu form and getting weakened from the attack, Kisuke intervenes to seal Aizen to take him to Muken. And as he was being sealed up, we hear his true motivation. He wanted to overthrow the Soul King and become the new Kingpin, being the entity that maintains the balance of the human, Soul Society, and Reiko Mundo realms. In order to achieve this goal, he would have had to first create something called an Oken, a key to the royal palace that would have sacrificed all the souls in Karakura town to construct it. Then, he would have had to go through Ichigo, the 13 court guard squads, and members of the royal guards, characters who are able to shake all 3 realms in the Bleach universe just from releasing their Bankai. As a character, Aizen was always careful and perspicacious. He always had contingency plans and countermeasures in place when enacting his schemes. Examples include him covering his blind side with a Kido barrier to prevent potential ambushes, creating Wonder Wise to counter Yamamoto's Shikai and Bankai, as he knew he would be the biggest problem in Karakura town other than Kenpachi. But he already planned for this, as he kidnapped Orihime not only for her unique powers, but to divide the fighting force of the Gote 13. We can go even further back into the Soul Society arc, where after being discovered by Unohana and Isane, Aizen decided to retreat instead of fighting them, as Unohana's previous title as the first Kenpachi would have had him struggling in a 1v1, even with Kyoka Suigetsu. Deciding that it wasn't worth the effort nor stamina and Ryatsu, he decided to leave, something confirmed by Kubo. It seems highly unlikely to me that he wouldn't have trained for Bankai before going through his plan to take over the Soul King. Why would he kill all these Soul Reapers to feed the Hogyoku for 100 years, then orchestrate Rukia's execution to obtain Kisuke's design, and then use the completed Hogyoku design to mutate his body to transcend the boundaries of Hollow and Soul Reaper, all before maxing out his abilities as a Shinigami to ensure he didn't lose. It's even heavily implied that he reached his full potential as a Shinigami in all 4 of its combat forms, Kido, Ho-Ho, Zanjutsu, and Hakuda, when explaining his plan to Ichigo and Renji back in Soul Society. This tells me that Aizen as a Shinigami would not have been enough to take over the Soul King, and he needed to evolve further to achieve his goal. Now with this in mind, the next question comes, if he does have a Bankai, why does he not use it in the story? Many people in the community assume that he doesn't use Bankai because his Shikai, Kyoka Suigetsu, is already overpowered and oppressive in a fight already, so much so that he doesn't even need to release his Bankai. The ability to distort and manipulate someone's senses allows Aizen to never be touched in a fight and can basically control his opponent like a puppet. While this is true at first glance, it's not the whole reason why this ability is broken, as it largely ties to Aizen's Ryatsu itself. In the light novels, Can't Fear Your Own World, we meet a character called Tokinada, who obtains a Zanpakuto called Enra Kyoten, a Zanpakuto that allows him to copy any Shikai ability he has witnessed. Throughout the story, he copies numerous powers like Shunsui, Yamamoto, and of course, Aizen's Kyoka Suigetsu. But there is a big catch. Due to Tokinada's inferior Ryatsu compared to Aizen, he couldn't utilize its full capabilities to the same degree. Even characters with superior Ryatsu can easily break out of it if they have a higher spiritual pressure than Tokinada. This means that in the hand of any other user, Kyoka Suigetsu is nowhere near as dangerous if Aizen were to wield it. Which tells us that things like Aizen having people under hypnosis for 100 years was due to his fat Ryatsu reserves and not due to the sword itself. So this begs the question, with an ability as broken as Kyoka Suigetsu, what would its power be in its Bankai state? To answer this, I think we should go over what a Zanpakuto is in Bleach. Zanpakutos in Bleach start off as an entity called an Osachi. Soul Reapers are given these to train at the Soul Reaper Academy, and after bonding with the Osachi and imprinting their soul on it, it starts to take form as a Zanpakuto, specialized for each Soul Reaper. However, it's still in its sealed state and doesn't have a name yet. For the Zanpakuto to evolve even further, the Soul Reaper must achieve something called Shikai, where the owner must learn the name of its Zanpakuto to manifest its unique power, as well as learn its release command. To achieve Bankai, Soul Reapers have to manifest its Zanpakuto into the physical world and subjugate it to release its full potential, and typically a high amount of Ryatsu to handle the 5 to 10 time multiplier increase. What's interesting about the Zanpakuto power system is that it gets expanded upon further by Kubo on his Club Outside page. When a fan asked about the logistics of Toshiro's Shikai / Bankai being stolen in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Kubo responded with this. Shikai is the state in which the wielder's power is reflected onto the sword, while Bankai is the state in which the ego born is developed and manifested onto the sword. The most common interpretation for this answer is that the Shikai form is how the user presents themselves to the world, while the Bankai represents your true characteristics deep down. And it's stuff like this that makes me appreciate Kubo's writing when it comes to the power system in Bleach. The weapon being an extension of your body, while this teaching obviously only applies in a physical context, being an extension of your limbs and hands, I like to think Kubo took this expression and exaggerated it for his story. Not only are swords an extension of your physical body in Bleach, but their abilities are also reflective of your personality and character. And when you apply this to any of the Soul Reaper characters in Bleach, it starts to explain some characters' Bankai and Shikai. Soifon's Shikai is a one-finger golden stinger that can kill opponents with 2 strikes, while her Bankai transforms into a giant missile that nukes opponents with 1 hit. Her Shikai embodying her perception as an assassin. Its speed and precision allows her to kill enemies in a quick flash, reflecting her position in the stealth core, while her Bankai manifesting in a gigantic missile that destroys everything in sight. Kenpachi's Shikai takes the form of a giant butcher's knife. Its giant size perfectly encapsulates Kenny's unrestricted tremendous fighting strength and his desire to keep fighting in battles, while his Bankai transforms his body into a ginormous rage demon, a reflection of Kenny's primal and destructive urges, something clearly evident when we look into his past as a child. So, when you have a character like Aizen, whose whole identity revolves around manipulating and deceiving people, from orchestrating Ichigo's entire life as a test subject for his holification schemes, to even smaller things like wearing glasses to make himself more friendly and approachable to his peers, it makes sense that his Shikai abilities would allow him to distort his opponent's sense of reality. So if we were to take the Kubo statement into account, what would the final evolution of Kyoka Suigetsu be? So to answer this, let's just go over Kyoka Suigetsu's abilities. As explained by Aizen in the Soul Society arc, Kyoka Suigetsu allows him to control all of his opponent's 5 senses in battle: sound, sight, touch, taste, and smell. However, if we go later on into the story, we find out that he can manipulate someone's sense of time, like how he did with Yuha in Muken. With the power to alter people's perception of reality, many people in the Bleach community have theorized that Aizen's Bankai ability would allow it to take it one step further and allow him to control reality itself. For me personally, I got a few problems with this. One, this would just be a more broken version of Remy's imagination Swift, where he can just imagine anything into existence. Since Aizen would have higher Ryatsu, and thus more range to flex his power on people, he would be far too broken for the story in my opinion. And 2, I don't think this would fit Aizen's character on a deeper level. So what do I mean by this? Well, throughout the story, Aizen has always been portrayed as this sophisticated deceiver who's always one step ahead of everyone else. Due to his intellect and strength, this led him to believe that he was superior to all his peers, viewing people as nothing but tools to push his own desires and agenda, making him believe that he should be the one to replace the Soul King. These desires get further amplified when he becomes a transcended being thanks to the Hogyoku. The poem in volume 48 supports this. People are all imitations of monkeys, and gods are all imitations of humans. Which relates back to Aizen's speech about trust, seeing inferior beings put trust in other entities to compensate for their own weakness. Monkeys are below humans, and humans are below gods. By saying all of these things are imitations of one another, Aizen is viewing himself beyond the natural hierarchy of faith, and seeing that they are all the same in his eyes. It's only after fighting Dangai Ichigo and getting hit by Mugetsu that his philosophy starts to fall apart, and we get a glimpse into Aizen's true character and his true feelings. He's lonely. Aizen has sacrificed so many lives to pursue his goals: Tosen, Gin, the Espada, the Vizards, and Momo to sit on top an empty throne. It's no wonder that he would have felt isolated knowing that no one would understand him, unable to form real bonds like his colleagues back in Soul Society. Now with information like this in mind, what do I think his Bankai would be? And let me know if I cooked or not in the comments. So I think when Aizen activates his Bankai, anyone who is under Kyoka Suigetsu should get released from its influence. So like, think about it like this. If you were to meet someone in real life and they get exposed as a liar, or you found out they did something horrible, chances are you're never gonna trust that person again, and that person will lose all credibility and control over those they have betrayed. So I think the same principle should apply to Aizen's Bankai. I think one of the rituals needed to activate Bankai is that anyone who is under Kyoka Suigetsu should be freed from its control. As for the ability itself, I have no idea. It would literally be impossible for me to try and accurately predict what Aizen's Bankai ability would be, but the best I can try and do is guess the true nature of its power. I think Aizen's Bankai would be something similar to Tozen's or Yumichika's Shikai, where it only targets one victim as opposed to multiple people at once. I imagine it would be some sort of paralysis technique where it traps the victim either with their own senses or summoning a separate entity to achieve this. But hey, I could be completely wrong about this. Maybe Aizen doesn't have a Bankai, or we may never get to see him use it in Thousand Year Blood War or any future projects. But only time will tell. If you guys made it to the end of the video, thank you so much, and be sure to like and hype the video to help the channel grow. And comment below, what do you think Aizen's Bankai is? I love to read other people's theories on this type of stuff, or if you think I got anything wrong in my assessment, I'll read that too. Thank you, and I'll see you again soon.